Welcome to another World History 2 topic walkthrough, brought to you by Mr. Michael, Social Studies teacher. This video is here to help you fill out your lecture notes, understand the big ideas, and maybe even laugh once or twice. So grab your notes and let's get started.
All right, imagine it's the early 1500s. The church is super powerful, like influencer-level power, and people are told that paying money can help them or their loved ones get to heaven faster. But one guy, Martin Luther, looked around and said, "Nah, this ain't it." He decides to call out the church, not with a TikTok rant, but by hammering his 95 Theses to a church door. This one bold move sparks a movement that changes Europe forever. New ideas, new churches, and some serious drama. So grab your mental hammer, because today we're diving into Luther leads the Reformation. All right, y'all, before we dive into Martin Luther and the Reformation drama, let's set the stage. Check out this map of Europe in 1500. Yeah, it's looking real different from today. Most of this area in yellow, that's the Holy Roman Empire. Not actually holy, not really Roman, and definitely not an empire like Rome. But it's a big deal in the story. The Catholic Church basically ran the show across Europe. Religion and politics were BFFs. But trust me, things are about to get messy. Because one monk in Germany is about to hit post on the biggest call-out of the 1500s. So here's where the Reformation really starts to cook. By the early 1500s, people are starting to side-eye the church. Thanks to the Renaissance, folks are thinking for themselves, questioning authority, reading, learning, and basically saying, wait, why are we doing it this way? At the same time, merchants and nobles were big mad about sending money all the way to Rome in taxes. Like, why should we fund your cathedrals when we've got bills right here? And then there's the church itself, getting roasted for corruption, luxury, and straight-up bad vibes. So yeah, all of that adds up to some serious calls for reform. People are done being quiet, and one guy in particular, he's about to drop the most viral post of the century. All right, so meet Martin Luther, not the modern-day civil rights leader, but the OG reformer from the 1500s. This dude was basically the main character of the Reformation. The church at the time was selling indulgences, which were like spiritual get-out-of-jail-free cards. You could literally pay money to reduce your time in purgatory. Luther saw that and said, hold up, this ain't it. So in 1517, he dropped his 95 Theses, basically a fiery list of complaints about church corruption. It was the Renaissance version of a viral tweet thread, and trust me, it blew up. Luther's main point? Faith alone gets you to heaven, not buying your way in. He also said everyone's equal in faith, no need for middlemen to interpret the Bible. Pretty bold, right? Especially when the Pope was basically the most powerful man in Europe. So yeah, Luther didn't just start a debate. He accidentally started a whole movement that would flip Europe upside down. So you'd think after shaking up Europe, Martin Luther might apologize and chill, right? Nah, my guy doubled down. When the church was like, hey Martin, take it back, he basically said, nope, I said what I said. So they hit him with the excommunication, which is medieval speak for you're cancelled from the church permanently. Then Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, was like, this dude's out of line. He called a big meeting called the Edict of Worms. And no, not worms like the squiggly kind. It was held in the city of Worms, Germany. There, Luther was officially labeled a heretic, meaning his beliefs went against official church teachings. But instead of going quiet, Luther and his followers said, fine, we'll do our own thing, and started a new branch of Christianity called Lutheranism. Basically, Luther got spiritually banned and then built his own platform. Total boss move. So, remember how Martin Luther basically roasted the church and started a whole movement? Well, now things get political. Because whenever there's power and money involved, people start picking sides. A bunch of German princes saw what Luther was saying and thought, wait, if we back this guy, we can stop sending money to Rome and take church land, say less. Those princes who supported Luther became known as Protestants because, well, they were literally protesting against the Catholic Church. Now, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, was not vibing with that. He pulled up with his army, defeated the princes, and was like, all right, back to Catholicism, everyone. But the princes said, nah, bro, we're good, and just kept their new faiths. Finally, in 1555, they came to an agreement called the Peace of Augsburg, basically saying, fine, each prince can pick the religion for their own territory. So depending on where you lived, your religion was whatever your local prince decided. It was kind of like, congrats, your ruler just picked your faith for you. Hope you like it. All right, so over in England, things are about to get spicy. King Henry VIII really wanted a male heir because, you know, patriarchy and all that, but his wife wasn't giving him one. So Henry goes to the Pope and says, hey, can you annul my marriage? Like, pretend it never happened? The Pope basically hits him with a, nah, bro. And that's when Henry says, fine, I'll just make my own church. He gets Parliament to pass a law that ends the Pope's power in England, remarries, and declares himself the head of the English Church, the ultimate I'll do it myself moment. After Henry dies, things get messy. Catholics and Protestants start beefing over who's really running the show. Then along comes Queen Elizabeth I, who's like, okay, everyone chill, let's meet in the middle. She creates the Anglican Church, kind of a Protestant core with Catholic aesthetics compromise, so both sides could coexist, mostly. So yeah, England didn't just become Protestant, it was more like Henry's breakup with the Pope went way too far and changed history forever. All right, the Reformation isn't slowing down. In fact, it's leveling up. Enter John Calvin, who basically says, Luther started it, but I'm going to take this reform thing to the next dimension. Calvin creates Calvinism, a religion based on his teachings, and he writes a big book called Institutes of the Christian Religion. Now, Calvin's main idea, humanity's kind of doomed. We're all sinful by nature, and there's nothing we can do to earn salvation. But here's the twist. Calvin says God already chose who's going to heaven and who's not. This idea is called predestination. Yup. According to Calvin, your eternal fate is basically pre-downloaded before you're even born. And if you're thinking, wait, if everything's already decided, why even bother doing the right thing? Congratulations, you just asked the same question that everyone else did back then. Oh, and Calvin wasn't just about ideas. He believed in setting up theocracies where church leaders ran the government. So imagine living in a place where breaking a religious rule wasn't just a sin, it was a crime. Yeah, Geneva under Calvin was that kind of place. So, Calvin wasn't the only one remixing religion. Other reformers were like, bet, let's make our own version. First up, the Presbyterians. These were followers of John Knox, who basically said, what Calvin's doing in Geneva, let's drop that in Scotland. Boom. Calvinism goes international. Then we've got the Huguenots in France, followers of Calvin too, but things got messy fast. They clashed hard with Catholics. and it turned into a whole series of religious wars. Spoiler, it was not peaceful. And then come the Anabaptists, who were like the rebels of the Reform movement. They said, hold up, baptism should be a choice, not something done to babies. They believed only adults could be baptized, and that church and government should stay in their own lanes, or as we say today, separation of church and state. That was a bold take back then, basically saying, hey, the government doesn't run your faith and your faith doesn't run the government. And for that idea, let's just say, the Anabaptists did not get a warm welcome. So, after all the drama, the protests, the church beef, the excommunications, what's the glow up from the Reformation? First off, the Catholic Church cleaned house a bit and unified, while the Protestant movement kept growing. Both sides realized, hey, education is power, and started opening schools and universities all across Europe. Got to make sure the next generation knows their theology and can read the Bible for themselves. But here's the twist. While churches were busy teaching, monarchs and governments were leveling up too. The church started losing some of its political power, and kings were like, finally, my time to shine. And maybe the biggest W of all? People started questioning everything, not just religion, but how the world works. That curiosity laid the groundwork for something huge, the Enlightenment. So yeah, Martin Luther didn't just nail up some complaints. He basically jump-started a whole new era of thinking. Talk about a power move. And that's the T on Martin Luther and the Reformation. One monk, one hammer, and 95 spicy takes on church practices. And boom, Europe was never the same. Luther didn't just start a religious debate, he kicked off a chain reaction that changed politics, education, and even how people thought about authority. From the church losing some of its grip, to new branches of Christianity forming, to kings and queens flexing their independence, this was major history in the making. And what's wild, it all came from one guy standing up and saying, nah, that doesn't seem right. That's the power of questioning the system. All right, time for that bonus question. If Martin Luther hadn't stood up to the Catholic Church, do you think Europe would have stayed the same? Would we still have one big universal church? Or would someone else have eventually started the shake-up? Drop your thoughts in the comments below for a chance to get a bonus point on the next assessment. And hey, while you're there, make sure to like the video. Luther challenged the system. The least you can do is challenge that like button.